Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's LGBTIQ plus Health Australia Policy and Research webinar, which will begin just shortly. We'll just give a moment for a few more people to join. All right. So yeah, it's just after one. So I think we have a few people here, so we'll get underway and we'll start. Yeah, so good afternoon and welcome to our policy and research webinar, which is titled Tipping the Balance, LGBTIQ plus teens experiences, negotiating connection, self-expression and online harm, which will be presented today by Dr. Catherine Junta from eSafety. So my name is Ian Down. I'm the Policy and Research Lead at LGBTIQ plus Health Australia, and I use he, him pronouns. LHA acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, their diversities, histories, and knowledge, and their continuing connections to land and community. We pay our respects to all First Nations people and to elders of past, present, and future generations. I'm joining today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And as we gather for this webinar, I invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on the lands you are on and the deep histories that continue to shape them. Please feel free to use the chat function to share where you are today. Okay, before we begin, I'd just like to mention a few housekeeping items. Our webinar today is being recorded and it will be made available on the LHA website. So if you miss any information, you will be able to find it there and go back and listen. After our presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. I invite you to use the Q&A function, which for most Zoom users is located down at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, so please feel free to ask questions at any time, and after Kit's presentation, we'll come back and we'll answer them then. And finally, if anything in today's webinar raises concerns for you, support is available. You can contact QLife, which provides Australia-wide anonymous support for LGBTIQ plus community. QLife services are free and include both telephone and web chat support, and information can be found online at qlife.org.au. All right, so today's webinar is from Dr. Catherine Junta from eSafety, who will be discussing the findings of the report Tipping the Balance, LGBTIQ plus teens experiences negotiating connection, self-expression and harm online. This report highlights the dual nature of the internet for LGBTIQ plus teens in Australia as a space for connection, support and self-expression, but also one where they face disproportionate risks like online harassment and hate speech. This webinar comes in the wake of legislation passed in December restricting social media access for those under 16, which could have unintended consequences for LGBTIQ plus teens who rely on these platforms for vital support. So today's discussion is an opportunity to consider how we can balance online safety with the need to maintain access to supportive, affirming spaces for young people. So thank you for joining us today. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Catherine Junta, who is a qualitative researcher specializing in working with marginalized communities on sensitive subjects. Her PhD research focused on experiences of gender in Sydney's queer communities. She has since worked in youth mental health and online safety research. She's currently a member of the research and evaluation team at eSafety Commissioner. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Catherine Junta. To you.
Thanks so much, Ian. And fabulous to know that me stuttering over my words as I present will be recorded for everyone to see after the fact. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. And as Ian said, the report that I'm going to present on, it's actually one it's one of our slightly older pieces, but it's taken on some relevance, obviously, recently. So thought it would be lovely to share the findings today. And thank you so much, Ian, for that gorgeous acknowledgement of country. I won't repeat it, but I will add that whenever I'm sort of acknowledging country when I'm talking about this work, I always like to bring to mind the experiences and perspectives of First Nations, LGBTIQ plus people, and try and kind of keep them in the forefront of my mind when doing this work. I think that we certainly had for the cohort used in this report, maybe 30 or so LGBTIQ plus folks who were also First Nations, which is unfortunately a number too small to kind of disaggregate, but their voices and experiences definitely make up part of the story that this report tells. So Tipping the Balance, as we like to call it, explores the online experiences of young people aged 14 to 17 who identify as LGBTIQ+. It's the fourth and final report in our Aussie Kids Online series, which is actually based on data from our 2021 National Youth Survey. This is our most recent youth survey, and our current one is, I think it's just closed. So we've just done a new one, and the findings from that will be coming out later this year. To put this report together, we worked with Dr. Paul Byron from UTS, who provided academic peer review. And we also worked with Out for Australia, who really generously facilitated a review of the report by LGBTIQ plus young people for language and sensitivity. There are a couple of notes to keep in mind about this report. As I said, data was gathered in 2021, and we've since changed the way that we gather data for gender and sexuality. So the questions in that survey really don't align with best practice in as much as they didn't provide a lot of gender options for people and sort of had one question of, do you identify as LGBTIQ+. So this report kind of presents the cohort as a whole while acknowledging that people with specific experiences within that acronym and intersecting experiences of gender and sexuality within that acronym do have unique and specific positive and negative online experiences. In this report, we're looking at the group as a whole, but future reports will hopefully be able to disaggregate a bit. And yeah, we've certainly brought our demographic collection into best practice since this survey was commissioned, but I think I hope that you'll agree that the findings are nevertheless really valuable. The other thing to note is that when I'm talking about the findings in the report, I'm comparing, or we decided to compare the LGBTIQ plus sample with the national average. So that's all young people who took the survey, rather than non-LGBTIQ plus people. There are a number of reasons for that decision that I'm happy to get into in questions for any fellow methodology nerds. But the main one, I think, is that we were conscious that it's possible that there were some young people who kind of do identify but weren't confident to say so in the survey. So we didn't want to kind of say that they were concretely not LGBTIQ+. So we're thinking about the national average when we're doing comparisons today. And our first key finding was that LGBTIQ+ teens were very likely to feel more comfortable being themselves online compared with in person. So over half told us that they found it easier to be themselves online than in face-to-face situations, which was more than the national average. Pardon me. And we thought that this is quite likely because the internet is a place where they make new friends, seek emotional support, get mental health information, share their interests or hobbies, create or post creative content, and share blogs and stories. And not only do they do all these things online, but they do these things online at a rate higher than the national average. However, we also found that LGBTIQ plus teens are more likely to engage in what we sort of call risky activities online. So these are activities like adding connections that they made online to their friends or contacts list, sharing information such as full name or address with someone online, sending a video or photo of themselves, sending sexual messages, or receiving sexual messages, and sharing naked pictures of themselves online. It's worth noting, and we do note in the report, that some of these behaviours could be considered sort of typical of sexual development for young people today, and especially for LGBTIQ plus people whose romantic and sexual relationships we know are more likely to be digitally mediated. These, may or may not be cause for alarm, but they are things that we consider to have potentially negative outcomes, and that's why we've sort of flagged these here. And as you'll see on the next slide, the sharing of personal information may actually be potentially connected to the fact that LGBTIQ plus teens reported having their information shared without their consent. So to that point, LGBTIQ plus teens in this survey were more likely to have negative experiences online. And I don't think any of these findings will surprise anyone in this webinar, that they were more likely to be treated in a hurtful way. They were more likely to experience hate speech, be threatened with physical harm, be pressured to send sexual videos or photos, have rumors spread about them, be harassed by others, and to have had private photos or personal information posted without their agreement. And I think sort of my take on this issue of sort of the potentially risky behaviours and then the negative experiences is that it might be a bit of a case of the more frequently you do it, the more likely you are to run into bad actors who then kind of harm you. So in the context of this, the findings really were that LGBTIQ plus teens have really positive and really negative online experiences. And that was sort of reflected in the qualitative data that we got out of the survey, which found that LGBTIQ plus teens are more likely to have mixed feelings about the internet. And we kind of gathered sentiment about the internet in a fun way, I think. Which was to ask what we call a projective question, which is, if the internet was an animal, what animal would it be? So you can see that a 16-year-old girl has said, I think the internet would be a cat, probably because the internet can be warm and welcoming and cute, but tear you to shreds the moment you're part of the minority, or your opinion doesn't line up with someone else's. A different 16-year-old girl said that if the internet was an animal, it would be a lion. It can be vicious, but it's also a magnificent way of connecting with others. And a 17-year-old whose gender wasn't listed said that if the internet was an animal, it would be a chameleon, because perspective is everything. So in greater numbers than the national average, LGBTIQ plus teens expressed this kind of mixed sentiment, which we sort of took to indicate that they sort of have an understanding of the risks, harms, and benefits of being online. And we also found, as you can see on the slide, that despite kind of these mixed feelings, LGBTIQ plus teens were more likely to spend more time online. We have a few different breakdowns of this in the report, but the one I've pulled out here for you is just that they were more likely to spend 7 to 11 hours online on weekdays and weekends than the national average. And the way that we've sort of made sense of this, or tried to sort of interpret this data, is that, maybe the benefits of being online are worth the risks to LGBTIQ plus teens. Or maybe even being online might give these teens the skills and social connections they need to manage the negative aspects of being online. And so that's a bit of a rush tour of kind of the report's key findings. I'm very, very happy to speak in more detail to any of them if folks have questions. But I'll let you know that for e-safety research and evaluation, following this report, we are sort of thinking deeply about these findings and taking them up in a few different ways. So I mentioned earlier that the newest youth survey, which went into field early this year, is going to capture more complex and nuanced data about gender and sexuality diverse young people. It's also going to ask younger people how they identify. So the survey that this report was drawn from actually surveyed people 8 through 17, but only asked 14 to 17 sexuality. In the new survey, that's gone younger, I think maybe to 10 or 12. So that those findings will be coming out this year and next year, which is really exciting, and will hopefully kind of add to and develop what we found in this report, and also update it, because 4 years was a long time ago. We are also getting to do a project, pardon me, that we're really excited about, which is focusing on the online experiences of trans and gender diverse people. This is a project that's focusing on people aged 16 and up, and will hopefully let us dig into some of the more specific challenges and benefits that trans and gender diverse people face online. And finally, as Ian mentioned, eSafety is the regulator tasked with implementing the Online Safety Social Media Minimum Age Act. And as part of our implementation, we're conducting an evaluation of the Act, which will consider unintended consequences, including potential negative impacts on marginalised people. So that's something that the evaluation team is going to be sort of tracking and noting as part of eSafety's work on that. That's me done. I've probably sped through it, but would love to hear questions and hope that was useful.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Kate. I noticed that we have a question. So Liv has asked, I believe you can see the question, Kate. So in the next survey, will there be a specific question that will be able to identify young people with innate variations of sex characteristics? Just you're on mute.
Would help if you could hear me, wouldn't it? That's a really good question. And I didn't work on the youth survey, so off the top of my head, I don't know. And I'm sorry about that. It's definitely the inclusion or not of intersex folks in our research is something that we think really deeply about, and have had some conversations many moons ago with some folks from Intersex Human Rights Australia. So this is an issue that eSafety as a whole is really conscious of, because there's really not much data on the experiences of intersex people and how they're specifically affected online. And so I think that if you'd like, I can find out the answer to that question if you want to send me an email, and we can chat. Yeah.
I'll just I'll post your email address in the
Thank
chat.
you.
All
Yeah,
right.
do. Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I just might ask just a sort of follow up, I guess, that one, and that is because you did mention that there was a question in the survey that just asked about whether someone was LGBTIQ plus, and you mentioned that you would be using in the future you would use like best practice, I think is how you said, and I wonder if you're aware of the like the ABS 2020 standard on sex, gender, sexual orientation, and variations of sex characteristics, because that has the 4 questions that capture those, and in terms of capturing intersex status, that would be a good
Yeah.
start. Okay, and I believe we have another question, but I'm just so there's Kate's email address if people would like to reach out. That's it. All right. Just on, you did mention, Kate, that eSafety will be responsible for the implementation of the new legislation. Can I ask what that will look like? I mean, in terms of what role eSafety will have in that implementation?
Thanks, Ian. Sorry, I'm just responding to an update on the new name for intersex human rights. Really appreciate that. You were asking me about eSafety's role in the implementation of the Social Media Minimum Age Act. This is a question that I can give you a very light touch answer because I do work in research and not in policy. And if you do want to know more, the eSafety website will have all the information you need. But essentially, eSafety is Australia's online regulator, and so currently, and have kind of been given 12 months before the Act comes into effect to kind of figure out how to implement it. And so the first step that the industry team is working on now is developing a way to decide what platforms count and will fall under the legislation. So they're putting together, they've made a very complex matrix and they're putting together that, which will go to the minister for consideration. And thereafter, I think it'll be, that kind of working with industry around what counts as sort of reasonable measures to assess age and things like that. And then, of course, when it's implemented, eSafety will be the ones sort of addressing fines and things like that.
And you mentioned that, like, monitoring or evaluating. To what extent? So let's say young people experience more harm because of these restrictions. How will that be? Will it be sort of tracked sort of in real time? I mean, will you recording?
So the evaluation is still taking shape, and I don't know how much folks on the call know about evaluation methodology, but they sort of develop what they call a theory of change, which is sort of like what mechanisms. So the intended outcomes are that fewer young people are on social media, and the intended effect is that fewer young people, for example, encounter harmful features of online platforms. And so they'll sort of decide those outcomes and the assumptions underpinning them. And then they'll sort of track those through different kind of research means. My evaluation lead would probably hate that jumbled explanation, but essentially my answer to that question is that it's still sort of being developed in terms of how to be resourced, but a huge part of evaluation is tracking and measuring unintended consequences. So whether that is, and also figuring out reliable data sources. So it might be, okay, what's the baseline? Is it, the ABS's health data, and then do we just sort of look at the next round of that, or do we do our own, or do we commission someone to look into it? Things like that. So making sure we've got good data to track intended and unintended consequences.
Thanks. And there's a question there from Karen asking if you anticipate that the new survey round might reveal very different patterns of online access given the Meta, X, etc. mass exodus.
Yes, thanks, Karen. And I apologize, I can't see all the questions in the chat. So, Ian, I'm relying on you. But the answer is yes. I think that we are anticipating, even like, obviously, the changes to Meta, to X, but also the fact of the Act, the Age Restriction Act. We know, like, the youth survey is a paired survey, so parents take a little survey, and then one of their children does, and we know that parents are very anxious about social media, and we know they're very concerned about social media. So I would hypothesize that we might even see parents proactively implementing more kind of restrictive mediation strategies around their children's internet use, and especially for some of these marginalized groups, a big change in usage patterns. And we do kind of ask, like, what platforms do you use? Where are you being harmed? Things like that. So that would be very interesting to see. And the timing of it has been convenient in that sense.
And Can I just ask, because that's curious
Mm.
that you asked the parents as well, but
Mm.
is there anything you can say about how, like, the parents of LGBTIQ plus young people, if their responses differed from the national average, or I mean, can you say
Yeah.
anything about that?
So I cannot, and the reason is that we didn't ask parents about their kids' sexuality.
Oh, right.
We and without knowing if the parents know how their child identifies, we can't really create like a causal link between their mediation practices. And I believe that's the case ongoing as well. And that's sort of a bit of an ethical thing, a bit of like a safety concern. We sort of don't want parents
Yes.
whose kids aren't out kind of being like, no, they're this, and then the child having the opportunity to and potentially outing themselves or anything like that. So that's sort of the logic behind that decision.
And also, do you have any thing you can say about how, I mean, as a researcher,
Mm,
wanting to conduct research on young people who use the
mm,
internet, I mean, I would imagine that you would have advertised, quite widely on social, like, I mean, Facebook, Instagram, these ones. What do you think are the implications for people like yourself or people who are
mm.
doing health promotion, who want to target messages toward young LGBTIQ plus people? Do you think that, I mean, are people going to be harder to reach now to get the right information to?
Yes, I think that, I mean, interestingly, we go through panel providers. So eSafety doesn't tend to publicly advertise. And there's a range of reasons for that, some of which are sort of being a public sector office, we can't reimburse people directly. Because of many varied rules. But if we go through a panel and the panel reimburses them and we pay the panel, that kind of that can be done, and it's so important to us to reimburse our research participants for their time. Um, I mentioned the trans and gender diverse project that we're working on, and this was something because we really wanted to get and we want to get a really broad and diverse sample for that survey, and we met with, I think it was Thorn Harbour's generous maybe campaigns coordinator. I've probably forgotten their job title, but they sort of gave the sort of me as a Luddite a bit of an overview about how like targeted advertising on Meta works these days, and sort of said it's actually very hard to target by sexuality or gender, or I think gender is easier, but by sexuality. It was even prior, this was sort of last year, so even prior to the changes and prior to the act, very hard to target. Um, anyway, if you have your own lists and you can do something algorithmy to kind of do that, but if you're kind of going in cold, it already is really hard to get messages out there, and certainly that's reflected in a lot of the work that we do. We just released a report into the online experiences of young men where we worked with uh, folks like Man Cave and Movember, and they sort of spoke at length about the struggle of getting their content in front of young men because of the algorithm. So I think already it's an uphill battle, and yeah, the changes might steepen the incline. I will say that the Act, as far as I understand it, does allow for uh, so if you're not logged in, you can still access features of platforms that are not behind that login form. So the example that they give in some of the literature around the Act is like if you're a business or an organization who allows people to see your business details on Facebook without logging in, then like people can still see that. So I feel like organizations in health promotion, I imagine, are all over this, and it might be side angles like that that they're working with.
And yeah, so we just had so Caleb from Thorn Harbour Health
Oh,
has said that yes, that was their community engagement team,
thank
and and agrees that yes, targeting has become increasingly difficult. And Steve, who's with Sarah in South Australia, so that's the South Australian Rainbow Advocacy Alliance. Uh, Yeah, sensory advocacy. Yes, sorry. Has asked if you'll be inviting groups in other jurisdictions to promote the research that you're planning with trans and gender diverse people's experiences online.
We are not only inviting, we are pleading. We've so far we've reached out to, I think, at least one organization in each state, just as a starting point. We're so keen for folks, and if you are interested in hearing more about the transgender diverse research and the survey, and think you might be interested in sharing the survey, please email me, or I will email you, because yeah, we want to hear from as many people as we can.
And I mean, yeah, just to mention as well that I mean, like Kate approached LHA and asked for our help with that, and yeah, we've reached out to members, and we will be including details about that in our newsletters and online on our website. So yes, and I believe April is when you anticipate that being live. Is that right?
That's the hope. Yeah.
So we have another question from Karen, who apologizes for asking another question, but
No.
and just thinking aloud, and we have ample time to fill. What are your thoughts on social media platforms deleting a lot of LGBTIQA plus resources that organizations like LHA and Working It Out, a shout out to their crew, have placed on Meta, which might hold implications for how young folks access info that might help them navigate online safety, or at least have positive and affirming experiences online. Kieran's the LHA have been working with Meta to try to resolve. Sorry, a notification just come up and blurred this brain. But there are increasing issues with LGBTIQA plus content being removed, which is the case. For example, the Q Life team here at within LHA, and our partner organizations who deliver those services had content. So because it said LGBTIQ, it was removed. So the answer is, what are your thoughts on social media platforms deleting just um, um, like that?
Yeah, I think like, at the risk of sounding like a woman of mystery, I can say that I know internally at eSafety there's been conversations with Meta about this. And I also will say that in the course of the qualitative phase of the trans and gender diverse research, we interviewed both individual trans and gender diverse folks, but also representatives from organizations, including LHA, about to kind of get a bit of an idea, a bit of an overview of what's happening for trans and gender diverse people at the moment online, and that's helping us shape the survey. And in those interviews, especially from community orgs, we really heard that, Meta might be saying that, oh no, it was a glitch and anything with the letter Q got deleted. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of if it's intentional or not, and the intent does matter, but regardless of if it is or not, people are experiencing it as an attack. People are experiencing it as, a reduction in their resources, in their networks, and the fear and panic and isolation that causes are real, regardless of whether it was the algorithm or whether it's sort of Mark Zuckerberg showing his hand. And I think the impacts is what I, as a researcher, am really interested in terms of like, okay, like this is happening to people, and it's harming them. And it's not the traditional kind of harm that e-safety typically thinks about. We think about sort of interpersonal harms, or maybe the harms of platform features like infinite scroll, autoplay, things like that. But a platform-based harm like this is new territory for us.
And just a further question about so the upcoming research, which will be coming in a couple of months' time. I'm just wondering how you anticipate those findings might either build on or differ from the insights from the tipping the balance report, because I'm guessing you've done some preliminary literature review around what experiences trans and gender diverse people have online. So what?
Yes. I mean, I think they'll differ substantially, and partially it will be, and it'll be for a number of reasons. One being that we're looking at a more adult population, 16 and up. Um, we're looking at it now, in 2025, and um, oh, there was a third one and I can't remember it, but it'll be different. Oh, and we're looking at trans and gender diverse people specifically. So obviously there will be sexuality diverse people in that sample, but the lens is the trans gender diverse lens. And so I think that we know that there are really specific harms that trans and gender diverse people experience, like image-based targeting, people finding old images or and mocking them, people going on to dating profiles. Oh, sorry, I'm about to list a lot of awful things just for folks' reference. Yeah, people going on dating apps to find trans people's profile pictures and then post them publicly, or infiltrating private groups where people are celebrating the outcomes of surgeries or social transition and posting them to kind of troll forums, threads, sites, to mock and degrade and demean. And so we're really hearing about this kind of very specific targeting, and also this very organized targeting. I'm mostly just kind of quoting from my interview with Trans Justice Project here, but like the fact of the online harms that they're seeing trans and gender diverse people experiencing aren't these sort of necessarily opportunistic things, but are actually part of a kind of coordinated campaign by organizations who are seeking traction for their cause and have bigger aims beyond devastating and harming an individual, although they do want to do that too. So I think, yeah, we're looking, there seems to be a bit of a different scale, and I think that there's also, the world is a terrifying place right now, I think, especially if you're trans, and watching the news, and I think that's affecting people too. Like, general sentiment is going to be affected by the time that we're doing this survey in, and needs to be attended to in the research. Yeah.
How soon might we be able to see the results of this? Is this going to take towards the end of the year, or?
That's the hope. Yeah, that's the hope. So I think that the plan is to leave the trans and gender diverse survey in field for longer than we normally would, because we are keen to capture a solid sample. So sometimes when we do panels, it can be almost like a 2-3 week exercise, from like where to go. But we're doing, maybe, we could be looking at 6 or even 8 weeks, depending on the numbers we get. If we get a lot in really fast, then we'll be like, great, and keep moving. But and then it'll be analysis and write up. And so I think we're planning to write around, like, or be ready to be writing in like June. So, and then I think the release is often actually up to our media and comms team. So it'll be ready. And if folks are interested, like towards the second half of the year, and want to drop us a line, we can probably talk you through the findings if it's not publicly out yet. That's a probably. But yeah, the hope is that we'll have things ready by the end of the year or before then.
Thank you. All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, yeah, we might finish up there. I'll just finish by saying thank you very much, Kate, for sharing these important insights from Tipping the Balance and for highlighting the complex online experiences of LGBTIQ plus teens. Your presentation has given us much to reflect on, particularly in light of the recent legislative changes affecting young people's access to social media. I believe that there will be a lot among us who will be happy to promote and to share the link to the future research that's coming in the next few months. To help deepen our understanding and ensuring that the voice of trans and gender diverse people are central to discussions about online safety and inclusion. And yeah, that in case anyone is feeling triggered, just a reminder that there is support available at QLife. So please visit qlife.org.au. And yeah, thank you again to everyone, to Kate and to those who asked questions, and for everyone who came. We look forward to continue these important conversations. And good luck, Kate, with your future research. We hope you come back to
Thank
talk
you,
about it.
everyone,
All
for
right,
your
thanks very
generous
much.
thoughts. Thanks.
All right, bye.